I'm just going to start off by introducing Clover, our team. There's a number of us now at Clover. We are expanding quite rapidly. And what we offer really is a service, a very local service, but we pride ourselves on also having a national reach. So we have a number of business partners located across the UK, and we can help service our clients' needs through all our business partners. Just briefly to kind of blow our own trumpets here, just to let you know that we have achieved the ISO 9001 certificate. This is a really proud achievement for us because it evidences the quality of our service. So we are kind of letting everybody know that we have this, and that it really does show kind of the expertise that we have. Introduce myself now. My name is Sarah Hudson. I'm an Associate Director here at Clover, and I'll be leading the webinar today. Also to let you know that I have a colleague, Richard Brown, who is on the webinar today as well, and he will be responding to any chat messages. So as we go through, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. We've got a couple of polls to put through as we go through the webinar. So if you have any questions, do feel free to pop them into the chat, and Richard will be able to respond to those. And we can look at the questions, some answers to the questions as well that you are able to put on the chat there later as well. So Q&A, if you have any questions, we can answer those either on the chat, or I'll be around for a little while after we've closed off the webinar if you've got any questions that have arisen from anything that we discussed today. If I could ask you to put your microphones just on silent, but obviously if you do have any questions, as I say, just type it into the chat and Rich will be there to respond to you. So I'll start. The purpose of employee appraisals. The main purpose really in any appraisal process is to evaluate how well an employee is performing. And it helps the employer to keep a record of each employee's performance and have a look in the whole how they are doing. So some of the really core ways in which it can help. Firstly, it helps staff feel valued, and that is very important. Taking the time out to speak with your employees and actually having a conversation with them so that they are the center of attention for that period of time, that goes a long way. That really does help them feel more engaged with you as a manager and in the process itself. Secondly, setting new goals, finding out what somebody wants to achieve, what the business is looking to achieve, and how those can work together. Resolving any issues. So it's an opportunity to have a conversation, to discuss anything that needs tweaking from either party and having that open conversation. Strengthening bonds, enhancing the relationship between a manager and employee, having that alone time with somebody to just discuss how they are doing, gives them an opportunity to open up and means that you understand more about that employee and what is happening with them, perhaps in their outside lives as well. Refocusing the team. So this is looking at refocusing on current goals and objectives. And I think this is particularly relevant at the moment when we're kind of coming out of working from home potentially. Perhaps some objectives have been put on hold for the last couple of years. So it's really resetting things to look forward to the future. And then finally, assessing training needs. So making sure that we've got training and development at the forefront really of our minds going through this process, and looking how we can help increase somebody's competence as well as their confidence. So I'm going to set a question now for the chat if you want to kind of put anything down here, and that is just to let us know your view on the purpose of the appraisal. So what's your personal feeling of the purpose of it, and that can be from your point of view as an employee or from the point of view as an employer. And what I'm going to do next is go into a bit more detail on my view on the purpose of the appraisals for those particular groups. So first of all, I'm going to look at the purpose of the employee appraisal for the appraisee. So this is the person that's coming in and having their work assessed, their goals discussed. So the positives to them are, it provides a sense of confidence and self-worth, job satisfaction, commitment and motivation. So it's recognition for good work that that they have done. And it's through this recognition that you will increase their confidence and really the satisfaction in what they have done. Looking at an opportunity to reassess work goals and discuss what's worked well and perhaps what needs improvement. And this is where it's a very individual process because it's bespoke to them. It's how they work well. Next, an opportunity to provide reasons for potential underperformance and discuss not only what has happened, but how to work forward from that. So looking at development points and how improvement can be made. And I think it's important that this is done in this kind of safe environment of the appraisal process, where it feels appropriate to have these conversations perhaps. It's an opportunity for them to discuss career goals, future progression. So what can they do to achieve what they want to achieve in the future? And this is really where development plans also come in and play a large part here in how they can get to that point. And then finally, building trust, building that relationship with the manager through open discussion. So as we've discussed in the previous slide, having that opportunity to strengthen the bonds of the relationship there, have a discussion, perhaps not just about work, but about how they're doing in general life as well. And an opportunity really just to be able to sit down with somebody and talk with them about these things. So the purpose for the appraiser. So this is the person who is the employer sitting down. So usually somebody's line manager. It's an opportunity to gain insight into an individual's job and the work of a team as well. People can be more open in an appraisal setting. Often they feel that perhaps it's an appropriate time for them to talk about things that they may previously not have wanted to discuss about their role. It's an opportunity to align individual, team, group and organisation goals and objectives and communicate to that to each person so that they know their individual role as well. It's an opportunity to hear potential grievances or issues that might need investigation. So you have a deeper understanding of something that might be concerning somebody. And it might be a minor thing, it might not be a big disaster that's happened, but it might just be something that somebody wants to raise and they don't feel that they've had an appropriate point to raise that yet. So this will facilitate that. It can improve your decision-making ability as a manager because you know what employees are capable of taking on. You know how stretched they are or have been and what they're looking to achieve going forward as well. So perhaps what they might want to get involved in. Identifying development points and training needs helps you as a manager to forecast into the future. It means you can plan ahead effectively, essentially. Increasing job satisfaction of the employee because you've looked at their performance, their individual performance, and you know what needs to be done to help them succeed. And that always goes a long way in helping somebody to reach their potential and also be satisfied and motivated at work. And a lot of the time when you've got individuals who are satisfied, this increases group performance as well. So you have less of bad temper perhaps rubbing off on other people where people aren't perhaps satisfied, and that rubbing off onto other people that perhaps are. So that can increase group performance as well. It's also an opportunity to clarify expectations. So look at what you're expecting, not only from the individual, but also from the team as a whole, and reassessing work goals to discuss what's worked well and what needs improvement. We discussed in the first slide as well, this refocusing of the team, particularly following on from COVID. And I think this is a really good opportunity to kind of look at what has happened during the previous couple of years, and perhaps what can be done to mitigate the circumstances, the experiences that they've had during that time, and bring everybody back into the focus of the role and what is going on going forward. And then finally, improve the quality of the relationship with staff, because a greater understanding of somebody's capabilities and their expectations and the development that they want and their goals helps understand that person better. And you can really get an enhanced relationship, not only with that employee, but also for them with other colleagues as well, looking at team objectives as well, so within that context. And now I'm just going to talk briefly about the purpose of the appraisal for the organisation as a whole. So we're looking at it fostering a culture where staff feel valued, and there is a commitment to that continuous improvement. And you're making that commitment by having these meetings, by taking the time out to review with people how they're doing and inform them if there are issues, or just to give them a pat on the back and say well done. It also helps staff to become more aware of the organisation's goals and values, so that they can see how their contribution is affecting the organisation's success. So perhaps getting a bigger picture and seeing kind of as an overview of the business where their role fits in and how that relates to other roles within the business. And that can really create closer ties between the individual and the business itself. A better employment relationship between the manager and the employee, which we talked about in the previous couple of slides, that creates a sense of cohesion and belonging. And following from that, you increase employee satisfaction. Managers are in touch with individuals' roles and kind of can really see what is actually going on within the business, what is happening in those individual departments and those teams and the groups. And often can stop issues arising because of that greater knowledge. Identifying training needs, which obviously we've mentioned already, but that gives opportunity for improvement at all levels. And it can also lead to succession planning for the business. So taking a larger overview of where the business is looking to go to and looking at what skills gaps there are and being able to fill those. It encourages the managers to really hone their leadership, motivation, communication skills by going through this process. And that makes them more valuable to the organisation. And again, it increases job satisfaction there. And I think the main point with all the points raised in this slide really are that for the organisation, the greater satisfaction an employee has, the greater their performance will be. And that obviously leads to greater profits for an organisation. So it's key that that satisfaction is increased. And this appraisal process has a large role to play in that. So why have the annual reviews? We've discussed in the last few slides some of the positives from the reviews for the individuals and for the organisation, and talked about the satisfaction for employees. But I think it's also worth pointing out that they are also a means to monitor and address non-performance. So they are a useful performance management tool for a business. They can be used to establish objectives, and that helps the individual see their part of the organisation and what they need to do to achieve that. And that can help them work towards achieving that in a more effective way. It can improve performance. So particularly where somebody is not achieving the standard, it's making sure that they're aware of the standard that they need to be achieving. And it's also holding people accountable for their performance. And you can look at this through ways such as reward, career progression, and potentially termination if things aren't going in the right direction. And this performance appraisal process goes away towards managing that process and looking at what happens with that individual. So next point, and this is quite the important point, I suppose, not just leaving it for the annual review. So whilst today's webinar is about the annual review and the importance of it, it is also really important to say that it shouldn't be left on its own. It shouldn't be a process that's done once a year and then forgotten about. It's an ongoing process. So you're looking at assessing and feeding back on performance throughout the employee life cycle, and making targets effective and monitoring them is strongly motivational for individuals as well to have those targets to look at. So whilst traditionally reviewing performance is often on an annual process and on an annual basis, this shouldn't just be the case. It should be a regular occurrence. And for example, happening at the end of a piece of work or every few months, depending on the role that the person's doing and how appropriate that would be. So looking at some of the methods here of how you would hold a review, of not just holding a review, but other methods that can be used to monitor performance are things such as 360-degree feedback, face-to-face conversations with manager and their staff, and regular assessment against performance targets. It's also important to mention taking a holistic approach. And by this, what I mean is an approach that's centered on a two-way discussion, a frank and supportive feedback process, so that an individual understands what they are doing correctly or possibly incorrectly and how they can rectify that. And we also would incorporate the learning and development into this process to ensure that the support's available to the employee. So having a discussion about how support can be given, what training needs there might be, or some general development. Once you've had these conversations, the individual manager can then draw up plans to monitor performance and feedback and review the progress against the objectives. And this can happen through mini reviews throughout the year. So whilst today's focus is about annual reviews, it is important to remember that these aren't standalone, and it shouldn't be a standalone process. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly send a poll to you. And my question on this poll is, do you as an employer feel that you're making the most out of your annual reviews? And I've just hopefully sent that to you now. And then a question for the chat. Do you have, or in your organisation, do you have any additional to the annual review? So some of these methods such as 360 feedback, monthly meetings, reviewing progress, what do you do in your organisation? If you could let us know on the chat, just to share some of the ideas of things that other organisations do, and see where they're the same or perhaps differ from others. So I'm just going to move on now to establishing objectives. So setting the objectives from the top down. And what I mean by this is that an organisation's strategic goals should be the starting point for departmental goals. So it should be a follow down from what's the organisation trying to achieve, and then how does that relate to what each department needs to do to help the organisation achieve that, and then step down again to look at how individual performance and priorities can set the goals to help the department achieve, and then in turn help the organisation achieve their goals. So this is why it's important that business leaders have their annual reviews first, so that the goal setting feeds down. And it's important to remember that until the goals have been discussed from a strategic level, it's very difficult to set anything meaningful that's really going to help improve the performance of the business rather than just the performance of an individual in isolation. So setting performance objectives for the individuals, departments and the organisation is an important part of this process. The objectives can be expressed as targets to be met, for example, sales levels that need to be at a certain percentage. They could be ad hoc tasks that need to be completed by a specific date, or they could be ongoing standards that are expected to be met. They might be directly related to the team or the organisation's KPIs, or they might be more personal to the individual. For example, a developmental objective for the individual, perhaps a training course that they should complete within a period of time. The employer can also look at setting objectives on a team level. So looking at team level performance rather than just the individual level. And the important thing with that is to remember or look at the type of work that is being done by the individual and by the team and whether that meshes well. And it's striking that balance between looking at the individual and then looking at the impact that they can make to a team objective as well. I'm going to talk about SMART objectives in the next slide, so I'll leave that for a moment. And then the final point really is just to make a point about employee ownership. So it's ensuring that the employee understands their role in this process with the objectives. So it's not just that objectives are set, but for them to really have that responsibility and take on the ownership of this process so that they are monitoring their progress, they are making sure that they're on track, and they're having discussions with you if they feel that they are not achieving where they feel that they should be during the process through the year. So I'm now going to move on to SMART objectives. So you may or may not have heard of these, but they essentially SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time bound. And it's important that objectives fit these criteria, each one of these points. And the reason to do this is to make sure that the objectives make sense and that they are something that somebody can work towards. So if we take each one at a time, specific. So this is, as it says, what exactly does the employee need to do? This can't be a vague objectives. It's very difficult to achieve an objective if it's vague. The employee needs to have a really clear understanding of what they are being asked to do. The objective needs to be measurable. So how does the manager and the employee know that it's been achieved? And are both manager and employee looking at the same measure? Do they both agree that that measure is fair and correct? And this will help when looking at scoring at the end of the objective process, where you're looking at whether somebody has achieved those objectives. You can understand where they're measurable, whether somebody has achieved them or has not achieved them, or perhaps if there's a measure that's perhaps in between so that they've almost achieved them, or even a measure that goes over and above so that they have gone further than necessary in achieving their objective. The next point is achievable. So by this, really we're looking at stretching individuals, giving them a bit of a challenge, but then at the same time, you do want to make sure that it's reasonable for them to be able to do this, that it is an achievable goal. There is no point setting somebody up to fail by giving them a goal that nobody expects them to achieve, because you will lose any kind of motivation and satisfaction that this process is designed to give. And then relevance. Does the objective itself relate to the needs of the team, the department, or the organisation as a whole? There is no point setting objectives that mean nothing, because yet again, it undermines the purpose behind the motivation of setting the objectives. If somebody doesn't see the point in what they're doing, they will not be motivated to achieve those objectives. And then finally, time bound. So there needs to be a cutoff point by when you're expecting this objective to be achieved by. And as I've said previously, we're looking at this as not just a yearly process. You might want to have objectives that are staggered by time. So perhaps in the first couple of months of the year, there is an objective to be achieved, and then you'll have a meeting to discuss that. And then this rolls on to another objective, perhaps in the next couple of months. So there's a process that can kind of keep flowing through the year and sets these targets for the achievement of the objectives. So just to summarize, the benefits we've talked about for the employees and the line managers and the organisation to hold annual reviews. And there are a lot of benefits that come out of this. I think one of the largest parts is the motivation and the satisfaction from the employee, but also what that then gives to the organisation as a whole. Looking at performance management, as we said, as not just the appraisal process, but an ongoing process with a number of other methods. And then ensuring objectives are top down and that they're smart. So I'm just going, I'm just going to have a look now at the poll. So the question asked was, do you as an employer feel that you're able to make the most of annual reviews? And 60% have said yes, which I think is really good, that you feel that you are using that process. And hopefully this has given you some tips to make sure that that process is nice and tight and it's doing what you want it to do. 40% have said no, in which case I would suggest contacting us at Clover. We can come in and have a look at the process that you're using. We can perhaps suggest amendments to it and look at how you're doing it as a process, but also the form that you're using and whether that's correct for you and the most suitable thing. So do feel free to contact myself or anybody at Clover afterwards if you want to look into more detail on that. And then I'm just going to ask Richard if there's any comments from the chat that's particularly relevant that you might want to just summarise for us. I may just have to make sure you can speak to us, Richard.
Hello, hi Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. We've had only one comment from Michael, and it was in response to your question about how you supplement the appraisal process. And Michael's talking about monthly meetings, mid-year reviews, customer satisfaction surveys with employment recognition. I think those are all really good elements to add that feed into that process. I think your talk today was very comprehensive, and people will have got a lot from it. And there were no other questions coming from the chat.
Lovely, thank you. Can you hear me now? I hope you can all hear me now. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I hope it has been useful for you. And as I say, if you have any questions, do feel free to contact either myself or anybody from Clover, and we'll be able to help you. Thank you again. Goodbye.